Hey, Merry post-Christmas to you and your family. Thank you so much for joining us online today. If you notice, and you probably do because you're at home watching this or maybe watching this later on YouTube, we have no gatherings in person today. We call this our Volunteer Appreciation Day. It's one of the ways we try to say thank you to the people who make church happen, not only our staff, but our volunteer. But also what we do is we take this time to set up what's going to happen next year. Next year, we're going to start this new series called Under the Sun. And we're going to talk about meaning for about 8 or 9 weeks or so. And so today is actually part of two messages. Today, I'm going to give you part one, which is an intro. And then next week, we're going to have part two. And so what I want to do is I want to talk a little bit about the question that everyone asks. I'm a person who loves questions. I love asking them. I love answering them. I love hearing questions from kids and people. I get questions all the time from people. I love a good question. But there is one question that everyone asks above all else, which we're going to discover today. And you have asked some version of this question. But before we get to that question, let's take a look back at this last year, 2024, in review. I mean, we're 4 or 5 days from the next year, and what has happened in your life? Let me give you a few of the highlights of my life. Some good, some bad. I survived having one of my kids become a teenager. Now you know how to pray for me at home and in your private life. As my son became a teenager, he made it all the way through middle school. Now he's going into high school. Prayers still be appreciated. I have a 9-year-old daughter who seems like she's moving into the teenage years, sometimes acts like it. She is a fiery redhead, and she is, a big, massive part of my heart. But man, it could be challenging at times. This year, what did I do? I played a lot of golf. Golf is one of those sports that is really helpful in the humility area, and I almost broke 80 this year, and before you get too impressed, a couple days later, I shot a 97. So it is a really challenging game, but I really enjoyed it. We've had family members who have gotten ill, and some of them were near death. We've had family members who actually did pass away. And so this year has been challenging for our family. I mean, for us as Christians, we realize that people who knew Christ and who passed away, we get to celebrate that they are in Christ, they're in heaven with Christ, and they are doing better. But for some parts of our family, they do not have that hope. So that has been tough to navigate as well. We've had family members and friends who their kids or their family members have either passed away, escaped harm, or escaped tragedy. And so it's been of a mixed bag, which every year is kind of like that. So I don't know if you do this, but I definitely do this every year, especially get towards the ending part of the year, especially in December. I begin to ask this question: will 2025 be better? And this is not the question that everyone asks. This is maybe a question that you ask, but not the most important one. And will 2025 be better? Once we get to the end of the year, we always hope that the next year is just a little bit better. Maybe to make it a little bit better, we ask a few of these questions you'll probably ask this next year. And we'll start with this one. Couldn't they have just gotten me a gift card? I don't know if this is you or not, but sometimes when people get me a gift, I think, do they even know me? You got me a shoe, which is a size 9, and I am a size 13. Does not help. Sometimes I'm just like, just give me an Amazon gift card, someplace local, a coffee shop, someplace where I can get something I want. That would be so much easier than me shipping it back. Maybe you got a gift like I did, where I was like, yeah, swing and a miss. I'm not sure. What about this one? Are interest rates ever going to go down? So if you already own your home, this may not impact you so much unless you're looking for a vacation home or maybe a second home, or maybe you're helping your kids or your grandkids. But if you are a young person or just a first-time homeowner, you have been on the sidelines waiting and you're like, are these rates ever going to go down? What would make my 2025 better is if I go from renting, which is there's nothing wrong with that, but you'd love to get into a home and you'd love to start a family, or you'd love to move your family into a home. Are these rates ever going to go down? Maybe you've asked this question: is AI just the beginning of the Terminator movies? I mean, if you've seen over this last year, we've had an influx of AI and how it's being used. I mean, my pastor friends and I, we've used it for research. I've heard some people use it for messages, to write messages. I don't do that. I'm afraid they'll just write a better message than I will, and then I'm out of a job. So I don't do that. But sometimes we look at this and we go, okay, can I just get a real person? I don't know if you've done this where you've tried to get a hold of someone and it's just an AI bot talking to you all the time and you talk to them in circles. I ask them funny questions. It's kind of fun. What about this question? Do we have to do the election thing again in 4 years? It feels like every 4 years, the anxiety level goes up. And after it's over, whether your person wins or lose, some of the anxiety goes down, some of it goes up, but we forget about it. And then about 3.5 years go by and all of it ramps up again, and you're just like, do we have to do this again? Seriously. But realistically, we're just asking this question. Will this new year be better? Will it be better than the last one? Now, these are kind of some small questions. Some of them are fun. Some of them are engaging. Some of them pertain exactly to your life. And if you had the answer to just a few of these questions, it would make your life better. But here's the thing. There are also some big life questions. You know, when you get to a place where you have maybe your basic needs that are fulfilled, and we're going to talk about this in a couple weeks, or maybe you have enough margin in your time to look and ponder, or maybe you have enough margin in your work, or maybe just a little bit of life. Most of us could use a little bit more margin, but every once in a while, maybe just before we go to bed and close our eyes and we're exhausted from the day, we ask some really big life questions. Beyond, how do I make it through another day? Will the person be okay? How do I put food on my table? How can I just get through the next week? We begin to ask bigger questions. And maybe you ask some of these big life questions. What does a person gain for all of his or her efforts that he labors at under the sun? Now, this doesn't mean just work. This could mean how busy you are, maybe the time that you don't have. Maybe you just laughed the fact that I suggested you had margin in your life. You're like, dude, I'm picking up my kids from soccer practice. I'm going to work. I'm trying to get food on the table. I'm trying to go on a date with my husband or my wife, and I'm just trying to survive. The idea of margin is laughable. And maybe this question is important to you because you're like, I feel so busy all the time. I'm not sure I'm actually accomplishing anything. And what is all this going towards? What is all my effort for? Because you lay down at night or you sit down and have coffee with someone and they ask how you are and you're like, I'm busy, I'm exhausted, I'm tired, and I'm not sure I'm accomplishing anything. What about this one? Can anyone say, look, this is new? I don't know about you, but a lot of the movies I'm seeing out lately are just reruns or rehashes of things that have already been out. If I see another Disney movie that has been made from a cartoon into a worse version of a live action thing, I'm just going to throw something at my TV. The originals are better. There's no debating that. If you'd like, you can email me at roycon@lifepointnb.com. But if you look at this, there's nothing really new. We have the same problems. You may have had the same problems for the last decade. Or maybe it's just like there's nothing new to do. Most of the earth has been explored. Most of what we look forward to, we've seen, and maybe it's just not something that we can actually grasp or understand. How much is there that's new out there that we can discover, that we can explore, that we can say, hey, I would like to see this next thing? Or what about this? For whom am I toiling and depriving myself of good things? I don't know if this is you as well, is that maybe when you work really hard, and maybe when you sacrifice, and maybe when you've given up your time, and maybe you think I've given up the best years of my life, and you feel like I deserve better than this. Maybe you've been in a relationship and that relationship ended and you feel like you gave them the best years, the best time, the best effort of your life. Or maybe you've switched jobs, or maybe your kids moved out, and even though you loved them and cared for them, you're not sure what to do. What do you do afterwards? And why am I depriving myself? There are things that I wanted to do in my life. I wanted to travel, and I wanted to go to this place, and I wanted to start this hobby, and I wish I would have been able to do this. I'm past that age. I can never get to that, or I'll never have the opportunity. So who did I deprive? Why did I deprive myself of all this stuff? One more, and this one's kind of the longer one. For who knows what is good for anyone in life, in the few days of his or her futile life that he spends like a shadow? Who can tell anyone what will happen to him under the sun? What will happen after him under the sun? Whoever wrote this, part of their desire is in communicating is that once you live your life, however you live your life, you do not know what comes after you. Who could say that? Because we live, we breathe, we live a little bit more, and then we die. Now, all of these questions, especially this last one, just sound like, is that from a poet? Is that from an emo person? Is that from a person who has been harmed in some way? Is that just a person who is whining and they're asking all these questions? It's a mini pity party. All of these questions actually come from the book that we're going to be studying in January called the Book of Ecclesiastes. And this book is an incredible book. It's a book that showcases a person who has asked all of the questions that we have been asking and all of the questions that probably you have asked in your life, and they have the answer to all of them. They have done a tremendous favor to us because they have asked and answered the one question that everyone asks. So here's the reason that we're here today. Here's the reason that we've gone through all the stuff that we've just talked about. The question everyone asks is this: what am I living for? What am I living for? Now, you may not have asked this question exactly. You're like, Kyle, I've never asked that question. I've never uttered that phrase. I've never read the book of Ecclesiastes. I've never said this exact sentence. And maybe you haven't. But my guess is you said some version of it. If you've ever said something like, what am I doing with my life? If you've ever sat down exhausted, or maybe with a friend or a family member, and examined your life and you're just like, what am I doing? I'm spinning my wheels. I'm not doing what I was made for. Maybe you ask the question this way: don't I deserve better than this? Don't I deserve better than what my life actually like? I mean, that is a quality of life, meaning of life question. Don't I deserve better than this? Maybe you examine your life to a certain degree and you're like, I wish I was in this kind of shape. I wish I had this much money. I wish I lived in this place. I wish I was married to this person. I wish my kids looked like that. You have a metric that your life is here and you wish your life was right here. You have an expectation on your life. Or maybe you might ask this, is that how did my life get to be like this? Maybe you've gone through some terrible tragedy and maybe someone has left you or harmed you. Or maybe you just feel like you've been busy for so long, you never got to do the things that you really grow up dreaming. I mean, when you're a kid, people ask you when you're a kid, what do you want to be when you grow up? And people say a firefighter, an astronaut, Very few people say pastor, but some people still do. I want to be a teacher. I want to help people. And then you grow up, and sometimes you grow out of your dreams a little bit. And you get to a certain age where you begin to ask a version of this question that makes you examine your life to say, I'm not living what I thought I should be living. Or maybe you just say, I need to reprioritize. Have you ever done this where you've gotten so busy, or maybe your life has gotten so out of control that you're like, I have to take vacation, I have to push everything else aside because my priorities are out of whack. It means that you believe you have a purpose that you should be living for. Now, the reason we're going to study Ecclesiastes for 9 weeks, beginning in January, is because the author of Ecclesiastes has done us a massive favor. You don't have to be rich. You don't have to be wealthy. You don't have to be rich. You don't have to be powerful. And you don't have to be in charge to answer this question. But luckily for us, the person who has done this, the person who answers this question, was all three. Many people believe that the person who calls himself the teacher in Ecclesiastes was none other than King Solomon, the wisest person who ever lived. So he had all three. Solomon was the wisest person who ever lived. He was arguably the richest person. He had wealth that no one could even fathom. And he was king at the time. He had wealth, he had power and influence, and he was ultimately in charge. And so he had everything at his fingertips. So he answers this question in a way that is fascinating because he has been there when you and I haven't. Here's one of the things he said is in chapter 2, which we'll look at in a couple weeks. He says, all that my eyes desired, I did not deny them. I did not refuse myself my pleasure, for I took pleasure in all of my struggles. This was my reward for all my struggles. Meaning he took a long time and effort to get to the place of power and influence and prestige and wealth that he was. And there was a struggle, but eventually he got there. And when I considered all that I had accomplished and what I had labored to achieve, I found everything to be futile and a pursuit of the wind. There was nothing to be gained under the sun. Now, here's the difference between Solomon and you and I. And just to give you a few examples, Solomon got to a place where he had no more worldly pursuits. He had wealth. He had fame, he had power, he had influence, he had control. He was arguably one of the most powerful kings who had ever lived. He had it all, and he was left wanting. Now, the difference between him and you and I is that we're always chasing something. You and I don't have unlimited income. We don't have unlimited wisdom. Maybe we have some influence. Maybe we have some power. Maybe we have control of some areas of our life. But usually, for you and I, throughout our entire life, we're always in pursuit of something. Solomon got to a place in his life, if it was him that was teaching, Solomon got to a place in his life where there was nothing left to pursue. He had everything. And yet he left wanting. He has done us a massive favor because you and I will probably never get to the place that he is. We'll probably never get to the place where we say, I have enough, I've seen enough, I've done enough, I am enough. He got to that place. And looking backwards, he showcases to us, I'm telling you, I've been to the mountaintop. I've had it all. Let me tell you what I saw, what I experienced, and let me tell you, it was not as fulfilling as you might think it was. Now, in case all that kind of sounds really depressing and you're like, I don't want to read this book. I don't want to know this guy. He's saying everything is futile, and maybe you think of your life, you're like, I love my kids. I do love where I work. There are lots of great things. I like a good cup of coffee. I enjoy watching the morning sunrise. Maybe you look at this and you go, there are a lot of things to enjoy in life. We don't have to have a pity party all this time. This guy just sounds depressed. And maybe that's him. But just a chapter later, he acknowledges something. He says, God has made everything appropriate in its time. He has also put eternity into our hearts. But no one can discover the work God has done from beginning to end. The idea behind what Solomon is saying is that because God is eternal and he's outside of time and space, and he was here before there was time, before there was earth, before there was space, before there was gravity, before there was anything else, something inside of us longs to understand what it is like to be something other than temporal, for this finite, small life that you and I live. Because God does not have a beginning and he doesn't have an ending. But for you and I, we have a birth and we have a death. And everything in between that space that you and I live is what gives us meaning, or at least we think. Or maybe we want to give meaning to that, or maybe we want to discover meaning. For you and I, because our time is finite and our years are numbered, in Scripture it says God has taught us how to number our days, and that each person's years are numbered, is that in the space between our birth and our death, we want our life to be meaningful. Remember, this is the question we've asked ourselves. The question everyone asks is, what am I living for? Now, there are a few things that we can gather from this, but this question is ultimately about the meaning of life, and to make it personal to you, it's about the meaning of your life. As you ask this question, each of you may have a different answer, if you have an answer at all. Some of you have said, the meaning of my life is to leave a great legacy for the people after me. And you may mean your family, your immediate kids, your community, your business, or just the next generation. Some of you have determined or discovered what that actually means. But can I challenge you a little bit by asking some more questions? We've asked a ton of questions already today, but permit me to ask 4 more, because these are so impactful to understanding how Solomon looked at life and how he does us a great, great service by answering the question, what am I living for? Because he challenges us in a few different ways. He never says these questions verbatim, but he does get at the heart of these. Here's the first one. Do we seek meaning? You can't get anywhere in life in terms of finding the meaning of your life unless you actually desire to seek a meaning in your life. Now, there are reasons this doesn't happen. Like for some people, they're so enamored by all the busyness of life, and there's an emergency from day one or from the hour one from when they get up to hour 24 when they go to bed. And they are so distracted by everything that happens to them that they never get time and effort and space and margin to actually ask, do I want my life to be meaningful? Some people are just alive. They never truly live. And so it requires us to sit down and think, to reflect, to cast a vision, to ponder, to wonder, is this what my life is like? Or maybe as people have taught us, many people have taught us, Stephen Covey is one of the person who said, hey, go to the end of your life. If someone was talking about your life and you were sitting in the casket, what would they say? Would your life have meaning, yes or no? The second one is, do we discover meaning? Like, let's say we're looking forward to it. Let's say we want our lives to have meaning. Do we discover it? Is it something that is outside of ourselves? I mean, people go through great lengths to figure out what the meaning of life is. People travel to Tibet. They go on spiritual retreats. They go on darkness retreats. They take vows of solitude and silence. They look inward. They look upward. They look to the stars. They look to God. They look to plural gods. They look to no one. They just try to discover the meaning that it's outside of themselves, and they're waiting for someone or something or a moment or an experience to give them an answer that there is meaning out there. And some people believe they have found it. So do you discover your meaning? Or what about this? This is kind of a more modern concept. Do we make our own meaning? Maybe it's not outside of us. Maybe it's not something that's out there. Maybe in order for us to have meaning for life, we have to determine what that is. Maybe we want to make sure that this part of the world gets fresh water and the availability of safety. Or maybe it's taking the gospel to a certain portion of our neighborhood or to the ends of the earth. Maybe it's providing a safe space for our kids and our family to grow up. Maybe it's trying to eliminate poverty. Maybe it's trying to get bad guys off the streets. Maybe it's simply being a great artist. Maybe it's being great at your craft. Or maybe it's living a quiet, humble life dedicated to God that no one will ever see. It's kind of a modern concept that we might make our own meaning, that meaning is derived primarily from ourselves. And maybe the most challenging one is number 4. It's kind of like number 2, is do we receive meaning? Maybe it's not, even if we weren't looking for it, maybe we didn't try to discover it ourselves, maybe we do not make our own meaning, but maybe the key to meaning in our life is that someone out there has the answer to this question, what am I living for? What are you living for? And rather you determining it or discovering it or looking deep inside to find out what it is that you simply have to have open arms and say, I will receive whatever meaning I have in my life. Now, it can be very dangerous. Where does that meaning come from? Who is giving it? And so Solomon has answered this question in the series that we're going to look at in a few weeks. So, how do you discover meaning? I mean, if you're thinking, this sounds like a philosophy class, man. We've asked so many questions. My mind is in a tailspin. You've said some things that I resonate with. I do want my life to have meaning. How do you do that? If there are so many possibilities, like how do I actually discover the meaning? Well, it's actually interesting. So what Solomon does in the book of Ecclesiastes to get us to the meaning of life, he does something very fascinating. It's this. One of the best ways to discover what is meaningful is to determine what is meaningless. One of the best ways to discover what is meaningful is to determine what is meaningless. Let me give you kind of a dumb example. You ever tried to look for something in your house? You've got a drawer. And for me, it's like the entirety of my garage. I always put my tools back at a certain place. Maybe my son uses it and puts it back at a different place. Or maybe I just can't remember where I put something. And I'm looking fervently, and it feels like I'm just like aimlessly wandering into a drawer or into my garage. And what is helpful to me is I have to move things out of the way in order to find it. Maybe I'm looking at my tool chest, or maybe I'm looking at my drawer. I'm like, nope, it's not battery, it's not the flashlight. I don't even know what that is. You move everything out of the way, and eventually what you're looking for appears. But you never would have seen it on your own if you just looked for that one thing. You had to push away all of the other distractions in order for you to focus on that one thing. And this is what the book of Ecclesiastes does. It takes all of the important or seemingly important things in your life, all the things that maybe you and I hold extreme value. And he says, that's valuable, but not as much as you think. That's good, but it's not the best. That's joyful, but it's not going to bring you ultimate comfort. And he goes through and he pushes everything else out of your way in your life. And then he gets to just one thing. And he says, if you were to look at the meaning of your life, now that I've pushed away everything else, all of this is meaningless unless you focus on this one meaningful thing. And to find out what that is, you're going to have to come to the series, of course. But I did say at the beginning of our time today that this is just one part of an intro. There's actually a second part. And it's probably counterintuitive, and it's maybe something that you might be surprised that a pastor would say. But here's what we're going to look at next week. Next week, we're going to look at what life looks like without God. And can I tell you, not all of it is bad. You can live a life that is great without God. But is it the best? Is it the most meaningful? And if you're not a Christian and you've lived life without God, I hope you'll come next week so I can challenge you a little bit. That you have great aspects of your life that you should absolutely keep. But also if you're a Christian, you may find out you have been living life without God for a long time. So I hope you'll join us next week as we start the series with part 2 of our intro. And thanks so much for being here today. I hope you and your family had a great Christmas. I hope you have a great New Year's. Don't stay up too late. I'll probably be in bed by like 8 o'clock because I'm old now. But I hope you and your family have a great 2024 and ending to this year. And I can't wait to see all of you in 2025 next year. Thank you so much for joining us. You're already blessed in Christ.